Here's a mediocre movie that's actually a lot more fun to unpack as a pop culture moment than it is to watch. But then it's also actually kind of fun to watch. Okay, so The Great Wall is a very, very, very silly movie. The operating premise here is that Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal, but mostly Matt Damon, are these two medieval European mercenaries, I think, traveling to the mysterious Far East in search of that magical new invention called gunpowder, who instead wind up detained at the Chinese border by the specialized top-secret army detachment that maintains the Great Wall of China. While there, they discover that, contrary to history, said Great Wall was actually built for the purpose of resisting semi-annual attacks by an army of alien wolf lizard monsters that's due to hit a day or so after they arrive. That's pretty goddamn dumb, right? But maybe it's also the right kind of dumb? I mean, these things are all execution dependent, obviously, but in its better moments, The Great Wall does almost approach a kind of Sinbad-era Ray Harryhausen vibe that pretty much always does it for me. It's not a great version of that, granted, but serviceable? Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is the stuff that's tucked away just under the surface in the form of a throbbing pop cultural and geopolitical subtext. The discussion of this movie in the West has largely focused on its seeming employment of the tedious narrative device of the white savior storyline, a la The Last Samurai, Dances with Wolves, Avatar, you get the picture. But while that's absolutely what The Great Wall wants to be seen as, make no mistake, Western credited screenwriters or not, this is very much Wanda Incorporated owned Legendary Pictures aiming squarely at selling Chinese produced blockbusters, bearing the unmistakable implicit thumbs up of China's state-run film industry to American audiences by centering Matt Damon. What it's actually doing on a narrative level is a bit more complicated. Now let's be clear, as a movie this is pretty forgettable, but as an artifact of this moment in time, it's kind of fascinating. You see, what we've got here is essentially a Chinese cultural superiority light propaganda piece dressed up in the mechanical trappings of a white savior movie in an attempt to make that very narrative palatable to an American and/or more broadly Western audience. So while Damon is the audience POV character and he does superficially go through the expected Lieutenant Dunbar bullshit, all told, he's really not much of a hero. He and Pascal's main role for much of the film is to sit around and be amazed and awestruck and impressed by how advanced and superior the Great Wall is, how brave the Chinese characters are, their ingenuity, their next-level science and technology, you get the picture. In fact, the European characters are consistently presented as these scruffy, slovenly, amoral barbarians compared to the more virtuous, handsome, immaculately costumed Chinese characters, right down to the Great Wall Army getting these gloriously over-designed rainbow-colored suits of armor, while Damon and Pascal always look like they just wandered over from a Mad Max movie. And to the degree that Damon's glorified audience translator has a character arc to speak of, it's all about unlearning his dishonorable Western values of greed and selfishness and embracing the superior Chinese values of teamwork and self-sacrifice. We get the expected scenes where he gets bright ideas and rushes into battle to save China, but it always ends up as a group effort where he rarely gets to be the point of the spear. His main contribution ends up being that he's coincidentally carrying a random object that turns out to be monster kryptonite, and he's not even the one who figures that out. A character played by Andy Lau does, and then figures out how they're supposed to use it. Unfortunately, even though the Great Wall is trying to co-opt the cultural supremacist white savior narrative in order to play out, well, a different cultural supremacy narrative of its own, it's not really trying to subvert the trope either, so it can't help but drag along the familiar, tedious baggage all the same. However much he's being undermined as a would-be messiah figure, it can't quite shake the sense that this story is apparently only important for us to hear because Matt Damon was there to tell us about it. Even if his ultimate role mainly ends up being to provide cover fire and emotional supportive cheerleading to Jing Tian as Jin Mei, a female soldier who is narrative-wise the actual hero of the movie. In fact, once his backstory is largely spoken for, Damon's main job is seemingly to provide an English narration for the story of how Jin Mei is elevated from the leader of the Great Wall's elite all-female spearfighter crane division to the general of the entire goddamn Chinese army over the course of the monster siege. And if there's a reason to see the Great Wall outside of a cultural curiosity item, she is it. Pretty much all the characters are strictly two-dimensional, but Tian has remarkable screen presence, and it's decidedly refreshing to see a female action hero in a movie where the fact of her gender is never remotely weighing on the plot, and who isn't an object or a love interest. Like, Damon's character kind of falls in awestruck, humbled respect with her, and she seems to mostly regard him as less of a person and more like a friendly, roughhousing puppy she's managed to domesticate. That's pretty much it for their relationship. Also, Pedro Pascal's character is a Spaniard who kills a monster by deploying his mastery of matador bullfighting skills. I just feel like I should mention that that's a thing that happens. So yeah, as a pop culture footnote to the rise of China as a 21st century economic and cultural superpower, there's a lot of intriguing stuff to unpack in The Great Wall, but how is it as a movie? Otherwise, it's pretty disposable. The actual story is very bare bones, the characters are all stock types relying on actor charisma to sink or swim, and while the monsters are interestingly designed, the CGI used to realize them is decidedly not cutting edge. And since the enemies are not humanoid either, you don't get much of the elaborate hand-to-hand combat that you can usually count on from Chinese action cinema. And that's kind of a bummer because what little we do see feels like a tease for a better movie. On the plus side, it looks gorgeous. Zhang Yimou basically has two modes as a filmmaker and artist, either intensely personal, poetic meditations, or bombastic patriotic spectacle, doing the job for the homeland. And while The Great Wall is decidedly on the lesser end of that less interesting second category, the man sure as hell knows how to paint a pretty picture. There is a scene of characters sneaking through a literal sewer in this movie that is more colorful, lovingly presented, and immaculately photographed than most of this year's Best Picture nominees. And like I said, if nothing else, it could be a star-making turn for Jing Tian, especially because she's got Pacific Rim 2 and that King Kong movie coming up next. Overall, though, strictly speaking on its own merits, this is mostly an attractive but trivial movie. 2.5 stars, pretty but empty, textually problematic but subtextually interesting. Yeah, you know, it's worth a look.